5:17 local time. The first warning does not emerge from the bridge watchers or the lookouts scanning the horizon through salt-stained binoculars. It materializes on a screen buried deep inside the Combat Information Center, where the glow of radar displays paints the Strait of Hormuz in cold green lines across tactical monitors. 3 surface contacts appear almost simultaneously, not the scattered signature of fishing vessels returning to port, not the heavy bulk of tankers loaded with crude oil, not the predictable coastal traffic that flows through these waters every day. Warships. They move from the northeast, spread wide across the dark blue water, their tracks cutting against the normal flow of commercial shipping like predators moving upstream against a school of fish. At first glance, they resemble routine naval traffic, distant enough to remain unthreatening, controlled enough to avoid immediate alarm, slow enough not to trigger the automatic warning systems that guard one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth. But then the first contact changes course. A slight adjustment, barely noticeable on the radar sweep, but significant enough to alter its projected path. Then the second contact follows suit, its track bending inward by degrees. Then the third, completing a pattern that transforms 3 individual ships into something more coordinated, more deliberate, more dangerous. Inside the Combat Information Center, a surface warfare coordinator leans closer to his console, his face illuminated by the green glow of the tactical display. New surface group bearing 068, range 22 nautical miles, 3 contacts, closing. The words move through the compartment with practiced efficiency, but nobody raises their voice above the steady hum of electronics and ventilation. That is not how a United States Navy carrier strike group reacts to pressure. Not in Hormuz, not in one of the narrowest, most watched, most contested pieces of water on the planet. At the center of the formation, the American aircraft carrier maintains steady course and speed, a floating airbase of steel and jet fuel, pushing through the morning sea with the deliberate power of 90,000 tons. Her deck lights remain visible through the early morning haze, casting long shadows across the flight deck where fighter aircraft sit chained to their assigned positions. Catapults rest in their silent configuration, waiting for the order that might come. Deck crews move with practiced rhythm, their yellow and red shirts creating patterns of coordinated motion across the vast expanse of non-skid steel. But beneath the surface routine of transit operations, the ship begins changing in ways visible only to those who know what to watch for. On the carrier's escorting destroyer, the spy radar array continues its relentless sweep, rotating again and again, feeding contact data into the strike group network with digital precision. The 3 unknown vessels are now tagged, tracked, and measured by the most sophisticated naval sensors in the world. Their speed increases from 12 knots to 16, then 18, each acceleration noted and recorded in the tactical picture that updates every few seconds. The closest point of approach begins shrinking, the projected lines on the display screen showing convergence rather than parallel transit. On the bridge, the officer of the deck receives the first call from the Combat Information Center. Bridge combat. 3 surface contacts maneuvering toward the formation. No automatic identification system signals. No response to passive electronic query. The captain steps closer to the tactical display, his eyes scanning the developing picture with the measured calm that comes from decades of experience in contested waters. He does not ask if the approaching vessels are Chinese because he already knows what the camera images will probably reveal once the long-range optics lock onto target. Get identification confirmed, he orders. Log everything from this point forward. Long-range electro-optical cameras rotate from the destroyer's mast, their sophisticated lenses zooming across miles of open water to lock onto the lead vessel. Through the heat shimmer rising from the sea surface, the first shape sharpens into clear resolution. A gray hull with angular superstructure, forward gun mount gleaming in the morning sun, phased array radar panels mounted on the mast structure like electronic eyes scanning the horizon. A Chinese destroyer, Type 052 class, capable of sustained high speed and equipped with modern sensors and weapon systems. The second vessel appears moments later in the camera crosshairs, smaller but sleeker, likely a frigate maintaining a wider angle off the carrier group's port side. The third contact remains farther back, not rushing toward confrontation, not drifting aimlessly, but moving with the calculated precision of a command node watching the tactical situation develop before committing to action. 3 Chinese warships, and their behavior makes clear they are not simply passing through one of the world's busiest shipping lanes on routine transit. At 5:19 local time, the first bridge-to-bridge communication goes out across the open frequency monitored by all naval traffic in the area. Unidentified warships. This is United States Navy warship operating with Carrier Strike Group in international waters. Maintain safe distance and state your intentions. Static answers from the radio speakers, no call sign identification, no acknowledgement of the transmission, no visible course change from any of the three contacts. The American carrier continues forward on her original heading, her massive bulk cutting through the water with unwavering determination. Around her protective formation, the escort vessels adjust their positions with movements so subtle they would be nearly invisible to anyone watching from miles away. A destroyer widens slightly to starboard, expanding the defensive screen. A cruiser tightens its position closer to the carrier's air defense umbrella. Another escort shifts aft, closing the rear quarter where threats might attempt to exploit gaps in coverage. The adjustments represent not panic, but geometry, the careful mathematics of naval warfare, where angles and distances determine survival. Every ship in the formation knows its assigned lane, its sector of responsibility, its role in the protective screen that shields the carrier from harm. Every radar system knows its assigned sector, its search pattern, its integration with the larger tactical picture. Every sailor standing watch understands that the difference between successful deterrence and actual collision can come down to a few degrees of rudder adjustment and a few seconds of hesitation at the critical moment. At 5:21 local time, the Chinese formation increases speed again, their wakes lengthening behind them as they push harder through the morning sea. Contact 1 now making 21 knots, the Combat Information Center reports, with professional comm. Contact 2 opening lateral separation to port. Contact 3 holding position behind the formation line. The tactical pattern becomes unmistakably clear to anyone trained in naval warfare. One vessel moving toward the carrier's starboard bow quarter, another sliding toward the opposite side to create pressure from multiple directions, while the third remains behind the engagement line to observe American reactions and coordinate the developing confrontation. Not a straight intercept course that would constitute an obvious attack, but a tightening geometric shape designed to create pressure, force decisions, and test the resolve of the American formation. On the carrier's flight deck, the operational rhythm changes in ways that would be invisible to civilian observers but obvious to anyone familiar with naval aviation. Yellow-shirted aircraft handlers signal their teams to secure exposed equipment and prepare for potential flight operations. Red-shirted ordnance personnel check safety zones around loaded aircraft, ensuring that any sudden maneuvers would not create cascading hazards across the deck. Damage control teams move closer to their assigned stations, ready to respond to any emergency that might develop. Nobody runs across the deck because running on an aircraft carrier flight deck during operations gets people killed by jet engines, arresting cables, or moving aircraft. But everyone moves with increased purpose, the subtle shift in body language that indicates heightened awareness and preparation for action. Below the flight deck, watertight doors seal according to protocol, communications channels narrow to essential traffic only, and the ship's internal mood shifts from routine transit operations to heightened readiness. At 5:23 local time, the second bridge-to-bridge hail goes out across the water. Chinese naval vessels. This is United States Navy Carrier Strike Group operating in international waters. Your current maneuver is unsafe. Maintain separation and state your intentions. This time, a response crackles through the radio static, short and flat, delivered with accented English that carries unmistakable authority. United States Carrier, change your heading to avoid unsafe conditions. For half a second, the bridge falls silent, not because anyone is surprised by the demand, but because everyone understands exactly what has just occurred in the diplomatic and military calculus of naval confrontation. A foreign warship has directly ordered a United States aircraft carrier to alter course while operating in international waters, a demand that carries implications far beyond simple navigation. The captain keeps his eyes fixed on the tactical display, watching the convergence of tracks that represents the most dangerous moment in any naval standoff. Negative, the communications officer transmits with measured professionalism. United States Navy vessels are conducting lawful transit through international waters. Maintain safe distance for navigation safety. The Chinese ships maintain their approach, their gray hulls now visible to the naked eye from the carrier's bridge windows. At 5:24 local time, the lead contact crosses inside 18 nautical miles, its bow remaining angled toward the outer edge of the American protective formation. The second ship continues its wide sliding movement to port, building pressure from the opposite side in a classic pincer maneuver adapted for naval confrontation. The third vessel remains steady at greater distance, as if waiting to observe which direction the American carrier will move when forced to choose between collision risk and course alteration. But the American carrier does not move, does not alter her heading, does not reduce speed or deviate from her planned transit through the strait. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical picture tightens into a configuration that nobody wants to name too early, but everyone recognizes from training scenarios and historical precedent. 3 gray tracks representing foreign warships, 1 massive red track representing the American aircraft carrier, all converging in a narrow waterway filled with commercial tankers, patrol craft, and civilian shipping traffic. No missiles have been fired, no guns have been trained on target, no fire control radars have achieved weapons lock, just speed and silence, bow angles and intent, the deadly serious chess game of naval confrontation where a single miscalculation can trigger international crisis or actual combat. The captain studies the screen one final time before issuing the orders that will define the next phase of the encounter. Bring the escort screen tight around the carrier, he commands. Hold course and maintain transit speed. Record every second of this encounter for later analysis. Yanaf. Outside the bridge windows, the sun rises higher over the Strait of Hormuz, casting long shadows across the water where 3 Chinese warships continue their calculated approach toward the heart of American naval power. 5:26 local time marks the transition point where the 3 Chinese warships cease being merely contacts on a radar screen and become an active formation conducting coordinated maneuvers against the American carrier strike group. The lead destroyer maintains its position off the starboard side, running almost parallel to the carrier group's course but slowly narrowing the angle of approach with each mile covered. The second ship, identified now as a modern frigate equipped with surface-to-surface missiles, continues its wide sliding movement across the port quarter, its white wake bending outward before curving back inward toward the formation center. The third vessel remains positioned behind the immediate engagement area, maintaining greater distance and steady bearing like a quarterback reading the defensive formation before committing to a specific play. Inside the American Combat Information Center, the geometric relationships become impossible to ignore or dismiss as coincidental navigation. They are not crossing the formation's path. They are actively shaping a tactical box around it. Contact 1 maintaining 21 knots on converging bearing. Contact 2 opening to port before turning back inward. Contact 3 trailing at 14 nautical miles with optimal observation position. A tactical action officer marks the projected tracks on the main display, watching as 3 colored lines begin forming a loose triangle around the carrier strike group. Not close enough to justify calling it an attack or hostile action, but too precisely coordinated to be interpreted as routine naval traffic or coincidental encounter. The American carrier maintains her course with the steadiness that has become the central element of the entire confrontation. That decision carries enormous weight in the complex calculus of international waters and naval diplomacy. Rihanna. In the Strait of Hormuz, every movement by a major warship carries political and military significance that extends far beyond simple navigation. A slight course change can be interpreted as normal seamanship or prudent collision avoidance. A hard turn can be read as tactical retreat or acknowledgement of foreign pressure. A sudden acceleration can appear to be aggressive maneuvering or preparation for combat action. In this dangerous environment, steel and electronics do not need to open fire to send powerful messages about resolve, capability, and willingness to defend national interests. Sometimes the most important communication is embedded in the angle of a ship's bow, the length and direction of its wake, or the deliberate refusal to answer repeated radio calls from foreign naval forces. On the bridge of the American destroyer serving as the carrier's primary escort, the commanding officer watches the tactical display without visible emotion or reaction. Do not pursue their formation or mirror their maneuvers, he instructs his crew. Maintain protective screen around the carrier and continue lawful transit operations. The order spreads throughout the strike group with the calm precision that characterizes professional naval operations under pressure. A guided missile cruiser tightens its air defense position near the carrier's port beam, its radar arrays sweeping constantly for airborne threats. One destroyer edges slightly forward, opening a protective shield ahead of the formation's most vulnerable approach angles. Another escort vessel maintains its position aft, guarding the rear quarter where submarines or fast attack craft might attempt to exploit gaps in sensor coverage. The carrier remains positioned at the center of this protective constellation, massive and steady, pushing through the morning sea as if nothing ahead of her could force any change in her predetermined course. But every sailor aboard the strike group understands that the tactical situation continues tightening with each passing minute. At 5:28 local time, the lead Chinese ship closes to 12 nautical miles, bringing it well within visual range of the American formation. The long-range cameras maintain continuous lock on target, providing crystal-clear imagery of the approaching vessel. Gray hull gleaming in the morning sun, forward gun mount in traveling position, angular mast structure supporting sophisticated radar and communications equipment. The Chinese naval ensign snaps hard in the wind created by the ship's forward motion, a red flag with gold stars that leaves no doubt about the vessel's national identity or official status. On the destroyer's upper deck, personnel become visible near the safety railings, their movement suggesting heightened alert status. No weapons appear to be manned for immediate action, but the ship's overall posture shifts from routine transit to something approaching combat readiness. Then the American electronic warfare team detects the next escalation in the developing confrontation: bridge electronic warfare. Contact 1 has increased surface search radar emissions, narrow beam sweep pattern, low power setting, not fire control radar lock, but active target illumination. The report indicates that the Chinese destroyer is no longer simply observing the carrier group with passive sensors, but actively measuring the American formation's exact position, speed, and heading with precision radar systems. Every radar sweep adds critical data to their tactical picture. Every electronic ping demonstrates clear intent to gather targeting information. Every emission represents another step toward potential weapons engagement. The captain acknowledges the report with a brief nod. Log all emissions and maintain electronic surveillance, he responds. Do not respond with active illumination at this time. The decision reflects the careful discipline required in modern naval confrontation, where electronic escalation can be as dangerous as physical maneuvering. The Chinese formation is attempting to provoke the Americans into reacting with more aggressive radar emissions, visible course changes, or nervous defensive maneuvers. Any such reaction could later be edited into propaganda footage, twisted into diplomatic protests, or presented to international media as evidence that the carrier group had been successfully intimidated or forced away from its intended course. The United States Navy refuses to provide that satisfaction through undisciplined response. At 5:29, the American formation issues its second formal warning to the approaching Chinese vessels. Chinese naval vessels, your current maneuver creates unsafe navigation conditions. You are approaching a United States Navy carrier strike group operating in international waters. Alter course immediately to maintain safe separation as required by international maritime law. For 5 long seconds, only static emerges from the radio speakers, punctuated by the distant sound of wind and wave action. Then the reply arrives with unmistakable clarity and authority. United States Carrier Group, you are creating dangerous conditions in crowded shipping lanes. Change your heading to ensure navigation safety. The same basic demand delivered with slightly different terminology, but carrying identical meaning and intent. Inside the Combat Information Center, nobody reacts with visible surprise or anger because professional naval personnel do not allow emotion to influence their tactical decision-making. The communications officer looks toward the captain for guidance on response. The captain does not look away from the tactical display where colored tracks continue converging toward an intersection point that grows closer with each radar sweep. Respond once more, clearly and professionally, he orders. The transmission goes out across the water with calm authority. Negative. United States Navy vessels are conducting lawful transit through international waters in accordance with freedom of navigation principles. Your vessels are responsible for maintaining safe navigation practices. Maintain separation immediately. While the radio exchange continues, the Chinese frigate positioned off the port side initiates another course change, subtle but tactically significant. Not a dramatic maneuver that would constitute obvious aggression, but an adjustment of just enough degrees to alter the entire geometric relationship. Its wake curves white against the deep blue water as the bow swings slightly inward, creating a new projected track that could potentially bring the vessel much closer to the carrier's rear quarter within the next few minutes of approach time. Contact 2 maneuvering with apparent intent to close distance. The Combat Information Center reports with professional calm. Closest point of approach now decreasing toward warning threshold parameters. Closest point of approach represents the single number that matters most in any naval confrontation involving potential collision. Not what the foreign ships claim over radio, not what diplomatic protests might later assert, not what flags are flying, or what uniforms are worn, but simple mathematics of distance, relative speed, bearing, and time to intersection. At 5:30 local time, the projected closest point of approach for the lead Chinese destroyer drops below 6 nautical miles from the carrier's current position. The frigate's calculated approach distance falls below 7 nautical miles. The trailing command ship maintains its position farther behind the immediate action, holding steady like a sensor platform designed to observe and record American reactions for later analysis and intelligence exploitation. On the carrier's flight deck, the change in alert status becomes visible to anyone trained to recognize the subtle indicators of increased readiness. An FA-18 Super Hornet moves into Alert 5 status, meaning the aircraft can be launched within 5 minutes of receiving the order. Ground crew personnel check wheel chocks and tie down chains with increased attention to detail, ensuring that aircraft remain properly secured even during potential high-speed maneuvering. A deck edge elevator remains locked in the down position, keeping the flight deck clear for potential air operations. Fire and rescue crews shift closer to their assigned stations near the island superstructure, ready to respond instantly to any emergency that might develop during the confrontation. The ship is not yet launching aircraft or manning weapon systems for immediate combat action, but all preparations are being made for the possibility that the next tactical development might demand rapid transition to active defense or power projection. On the escort destroyer, a helicopter crew moves rapidly across the flight deck toward an MH-60R Seahawk helicopter parked in the ready position. Rotor blades remain folded for transit, but the aircraft's doors stand open, and a sensor operator is already inside running pre-flight checks on the sophisticated surveillance equipment that makes the Seahawk invaluable for maritime reconnaissance. The helicopter does not represent a weapon system in this particular tactical situation, but rather serves as an airborne sensor platform that can extend the formation's ability to observe and record the developing confrontation. Sometimes in naval warfare, having additional electronic eyes and cameras positioned above the immediate action can prove as valuable as missile launchers or gun mounts. At 5:31 local time, the lead Chinese destroyer executes another slight course change inward, the movement small enough to maintain plausible deniability but large enough to register clearly on every radar system, monitoring the encounter. Captain Combat Information Center calls with increased urgency. Closest point of approach is now inside the established warning threshold for safe navigation. The bridge atmosphere grows more focused as everyone present understands that the tactical situation has moved into a new phase of potential danger. The American carrier maintains her course with the same steady determination that has characterized her movement since the encounter began, but the Chinese formation's pressure continues building towards some kind of resolution. The escort vessels remain in their assigned protective positions, but everyone aboard can feel the tension tightening like a spring being compressed toward its breaking point. The next few minutes will determine whether this confrontation ends with professional separation or escalates into something far more dangerous for everyone involved in the crowded waters of the Strait of Hormuz. 5:32 local time brings the moment when theoretical warning calculations become immediate tactical reality. The warning threshold is no longer an abstract line on a computer display, but a concrete boundary that demands decisive action from the American formation. On the main tactical screen, the lead Chinese destroyer's projected course now cuts dangerously close to the protective screen established around the aircraft carrier. Not close enough to justify calling it an imminent attack requiring weapons release authorization. Not close enough to trigger automatic defensive systems, but close enough that every subsequent second must be carefully measured, thoroughly documented, and answered with precision that balances deterrence against escalation. The American carrier maintains her heading with the unwavering determination that has become the central pillar of the entire standoff situation. If the massive ship turns away too sharply from her intended course, the Chinese formation can later claim that the carrier yielded to foreign pressure in international waters. If she accelerates significantly beyond normal transit speed, the tactical situation could spiral into dangerous high-speed maneuvering in crowded shipping lanes. If she reduces speed or stops her forward progress, the entire formation would compress dangerously inside one of the world's busiest maritime choke points, creating hazards for commercial traffic and potential diplomatic incidents. So the aircraft carrier does exactly what carriers are designed and trained to do under pressure. She maintains steady course and speed, projecting strength through consistency rather than dramatic gesture. Round the carrier, her escort vessels begin executing the coordinated movements that represent decades of tactical development and training. One American destroyer pushes slightly forward and outward, deliberately placing itself in the water space between the approaching Chinese destroyer and the carrier's starboard bow quarter. The maneuver is controlled, smooth, and unmistakably intentional, executed without excessive speed or aggressive posturing. The escort does not charge toward the Chinese vessel in a threatening manner, does not accelerate to ramming speed, does not train weapon systems on target. Instead, it simply occupies the specific piece of ocean that represents the most critical tactical terrain in the entire confrontation. Inside the American Combat Information Center, the surface warfare officer watches the geometric relationships shift on his display screen. Screen unit now positioned between Contact 1 and the carrier, he reports with calm professionalism. Closest point of approach still decreasing, but intercept geometry has changed significantly. The captain acknowledges with a single nod before issuing the next order that everyone has been anticipating. Launch the Seahawk helicopter immediately, maintain surveillance altitude, and provide continuous reconnaissance of the Chinese formation. On the flight deck of the escort destroyer, the MH-60R Seahawk helicopter comes alive with mechanical precision. Rotor blades begin their rotation slowly at first, then accelerating into the distinctive whipping sound that cuts through wind and wave noise. Deck crew members crouch low beneath the rotor arc, their helmets pulled down against the powerful downwash, their hands moving in practice signals that guide the helicopter through its launch sequence. The Seahawk lifts cleanly away from the destroyer's flight deck and slides out over the open water with its nose angled toward the Chinese formation. The helicopter does not carry anti-ship missiles or torpedoes for this mission because its role is not attack but presence, observation, and deterrence through visibility. The MH-60R is equipped with sophisticated cameras, electronic sensors, communications equipment, and most importantly, the ability to broadcast its presence across multiple frequencies while recording everything that occurs below. In a naval standoff of this type, that combination of capabilities can prove more valuable than conventional weapons. At 5:34, the helicopter descends to 500 feet above sea level and moves ahead of the American formation, positioning itself wide enough to avoid appearing provocative while remaining close enough to make its surveillance mission impossible to ignore. The forward-looking infrared sensor locks onto the lead Chinese destroyer, immediately revealing heat signatures across the foreign vessel's upper deck areas. Engine exhaust glows bright white on the thermal display, indicating the ship is operating at high power settings. The forward gun mount appears as a cooler signature, still in its neutral training position, but now under continuous American observation. The Seahawk crew transmits their first warning on the international emergency frequency monitored by all vessels in the area. Chinese naval vessels. This is United States Navy helicopter operating with Carrier Strike Group in international waters. Your current maneuver creates unsafe navigation conditions. Maintain safe separation immediately in accordance with international maritime law. No response emerges from the radio speakers, but the Chinese destroyer maintains its current heading without visible course correction. At 5:35, the second Chinese vessel positioned off the port quarter executes another inward turn, this maneuver more pronounced than previous adjustments. The tactical effect forces the American cruiser to tighten its defensive position slightly closer to the carrier, compressing the strike group formation by design, rather than accident. The carrier group is now operating in a more condensed protective formation without breaking transit discipline, creating a harder defensive shell around the high-value target without appearing to retreat from foreign pressure. Every movement is being observed and recorded by multiple sensor systems on both sides of the confrontation. Every wake pattern matters for later analysis. Every angle of approach will be studied and debated by intelligence specialists for months after this encounter ends. Then the electronic warfare console displays its next warning indicator. Electronic warfare to bridge. Contact 1 radar emission characteristics have changed significantly. Stronger sweep pattern, still not fire control radar, but they are actively painting the entire formation with targeting quality information. The captain's expression remains unchanged, reflecting the emotional control that separates professional naval officers from civilian observers. Log the emission change and continue monitoring. He responds, "Do not illuminate targets with our fire control systems at this time." The restraint represents sophisticated tactical thinking under extreme pressure. The American ships possess the technological capability to answer Chinese radar emissions with far more powerful targeting systems that would send an unmistakable message about combat readiness and weapons capability. They could paint the Chinese destroyer with fire control radar energy and make the threat level brutally clear to everyone monitoring electronic emissions in the area. But such escalation would move the encounter into a different and more dangerous category, one that could justify the Chinese formation taking more aggressive defensive action or claiming that the Americans had threatened them with imminent attack. The United States Navy does not need to escalate the electronic warfare aspect of this confrontation to demonstrate that it remains ready for any development. Professional competence and tactical discipline can send equally powerful messages without crossing lines that might prove difficult to step back from later. At 5:36, the lead Chinese destroyer executes its most dangerous maneuver since the encounter began. The ship's bow shifts another few degrees inward, a movement that appears small when observed from miles away, but registers as tactically significant on every radar screen, monitoring the developing situation. Inside the American Combat Information Center, the projected track updates automatically, showing a new course line that brings the Chinese vessel toward the outer edge of the destroyer screen. Closest point of approach now under 4 nautical miles, the surface warfare coordinator calls, with increased tension in his voice. Time to closest point of approach, approximately 6 minutes at current speed and bearing. On the bridge, the captain finally issues the order that everyone has been waiting for since the encounter began. "We'll show them the line that cannot be crossed," he commands with quiet authority. The American destroyer does not turn aggressively toward the approaching Chinese ship in a threatening manner, does not accelerate to attack speed, does not activate weapon systems for immediate engagement. Instead, the escort vessel simply adjusts its heading by the precise number of degrees necessary to make absolutely clear that any further inward movement by the Chinese destroyer will result in a face-to-face confrontation with a United States Navy warship rather than an undefended approach to the aircraft carrier. Not an exposed high-value target, but a fully armed escort vessel positioned exactly where it needs to be to defend American interests. Above the surface action, the Seahawk helicopter adjusts its orbit pattern, crossing ahead of both formations at a safe distance, flying low enough for its national markings to be clearly visible, maintaining sufficient altitude to remain obviously non-threatening. The helicopter's camera systems never lose focus on the Chinese bridge structure, streaming real-time video back to the carrier strike group while creating a permanent record that is automatically time-stamped, geolocated, and stored in multiple backup systems. Then the American formation issues its most direct warning of the entire encounter. "Chinese warship, your current course creates immediate risk of collision with United States Navy vessels. Alter course immediately to avoid unsafe navigation conditions." For several seconds, only the sound of static and wave noise emerges from the radio speakers, creating a moment of suspended tension where both sides seem to be calculating their next move. Then a voice responds with the same flat authority that has characterized all Chinese communications during the standoff. "United States vessels are creating dangerous conditions in international shipping lanes. Change heading immediately for navigation safety." The American captain does not respond immediately to the repeated demand, instead taking time to study the tactical display where colored tracks show the exact positions and projected courses of all vessels involved in the confrontation. The carrier maintains her steady position at the formation center, the cruiser holds its defensive station to port, the aft escort secures the rear quarter approach, the Seahawk continues its surveillance orbit overhead, and the lead destroyer stands positioned directly between the carrier and the approaching Chinese vessel. The formation is now compressed into its tightest defensive configuration since the encounter began, tight enough to send an unmistakable message about American resolve and capability, but not so tight as to appear panicked or desperate. At 5:38 local time, the Chinese destroyer increases speed by 2 knots, a seemingly small adjustment that nevertheless changes the tactical mathematics of the entire situation. In the open ocean, a 2-knot speed increase might pass unnoticed, but in the Strait of Hormuz with multiple naval formations maneuvering in close proximity, such changes can transform routine encounters into emergency situations within minutes. Contact 1 accelerating, the Combat Information Center reports with heightened urgency. Closest point of approach now inside 3 nautical miles and decreasing. The bridge falls silent again as everyone present understands that the confrontation has entered its most dangerous phase. The American destroyer's forward gun mount rotates slightly, not directly toward the Chinese ship in an obviously threatening manner, not rapidly enough to suggest imminent combat action, but just enough for the movement to be clearly visible to observers aboard the approaching vessel. No warning shot is fired, no missile hatches open, no fire control radar achieves weapons lock on target, only steel moving deliberately on steel, the subtle language of naval confrontation that communicates resolve without crossing the threshold into actual combat action. The Seahawk helicopter widens its surveillance orbit and transmits one final warning on the emergency frequency. "Chinese warship, you are approaching unsafe range of United States Navy formation." Alter course immediately to avoid risk of collision and ensure navigation safety for all vessels in the area. This time, the Chinese destroyer does not respond over radio, maintaining radio silence while continuing its approach toward the American defensive screen. The vessel keeps coming at increased speed, and the American destroyer moves fully into the gap between the approaching threat and the aircraft carrier, positioning itself exactly where it needs to be to fulfill its primary mission of protecting the high-value unit at the center of the formation. The next few minutes will determine whether professional seamanship and tactical discipline can resolve this confrontation without escalation, or whether the situation will spiral into something far more dangerous for everyone involved in the crowded waters of one of the world's most strategic maritime choke points. 5:40 local time marks the moment when the American destroyer completes its movement into the critical tactical position. Not with excessive speed that might appear reckless or aggressive, not with dramatic maneuvering that could be interpreted as threatening, but with just enough deliberate motion to occupy the water space that matters most. The escort vessel's bow cuts across the morning sea ahead of the carrier's starboard side, throwing a hard white wake that creates a visible line between the Chinese approach and the American formation center. From an aerial perspective, the maneuver appears to be nothing more than routine escort positioning within a moving naval formation, one destroyer adjusting its station, while the larger group continues its transit through international waters. But inside the combat information centers of every vessel monitoring this encounter, everyone understands exactly what has occurred in the tactical geometry of modern naval confrontation. The United States Navy has placed steel and firepower directly between an approaching Chinese destroyer and an American aircraft carrier, creating a new tactical reality that changes every calculation and option available to both sides. No missile has been launched, no warning shot has been fired across anyone's bow, no shouted ultimatum has been delivered over radio frequencies. Just professional positioning executed with the kind of precision that transforms tactical theory into operational reality. At sea, position represents power in its most fundamental form, and the Americans have just demonstrated their understanding of that principle. Screen unit now established between Contact 1 and the carrier. The Combat Information Center reports with calm satisfaction. Carrier maintaining original course and speed, formation integrity intact, defensive posture established. The captain studies the tactical display where colored tracks show the new geometric relationships between all vessels involved in the confrontation. The lead Chinese warship continues closing distance, but its angle of approach has been fundamentally altered by the American destroyer's movement. The Chinese vessel is no longer approaching empty ocean alongside the aircraft carrier, where it could potentially create maximum pressure and political effect. Instead, it is approaching a United States Navy destroyer already positioned and waiting in the most critical piece of water in the entire tactical area. That change transforms the entire decision matrix facing the Chinese formation commander. If the approaching destroyer continues its inward course without alteration, it will be forced to cut directly across the American escort's projected track, creating a collision risk situation that will be recorded on radar systems, camera footage, and electronic logs maintained by multiple nations and commercial vessels in the area. If the Chinese ship turns away from its current approach, the pressure maneuver fails, and the American formation continues its transit without yielding to foreign demands. If the Chinese vessel reduces speed significantly, the carrier strike group will simply maintain its course and speed, moving through the strait untouched while the foreign ships fall behind the action. The tactical trap has been reversed through professional seamanship and precise positioning, forcing the Chinese formation to choose between dangerous escalation and tactical withdrawal. At 5:41, the Seahawk helicopter adjusts its surveillance orbit to provide optimal camera coverage of the developing situation. The MH-60R's sophisticated sensor systems maintain continuous lock on the Chinese destroyer's bridge structure, capturing every detail of the ship's configuration and crew activity. Personnel movements along the deck railings, the forward gun mount remaining in its neutral training position, signal flags secured in their normal transit configuration, bridge windows reflecting the morning sun as the vessel continues its approach. The helicopter's radar systems detect no change in the Chinese ship's electronic emissions, still no fire control radar lock, no targeting systems activated for immediate weapons engagement. That observation carries critical importance because it suggests the confrontation has not yet crossed the threshold into active combat preparation, despite the dangerous proximity and aggressive maneuvering. The line between pressure tactics and actual attack preparation remains intact, providing both sides with options for professional resolution. The American destroyer issues its next formal warning with calm authority that cuts through radio static and background noise. Chinese warship. This is United States Navy warship. You are approaching at unsafe range of carrier strike group conducting lawful transit. Alter course immediately to avoid risk of collision and ensure navigation safety. Static fills the radio speakers for several seconds before the Chinese response arrives with the same flat tone that has characterized all their communications during the encounter. We are maintaining lawful navigation in international waters. United States vessels are creating unsafe conditions through aggressive maneuvering. The American reply comes back immediately without hesitation or consultation. Negative. You are maneuvering toward carrier strike group conducting routine transit through international waters. Alter course now to maintain safe separation as required by international maritime law. Behind the protective screen created by the destroyer's positioning, the aircraft carrier continues forward with the same steady power and determination that has characterized her movement throughout the entire confrontation. The massive ship's deck now operates under full alert status, with Super Hornet fighter aircraft positioned for potential launch, fire and rescue crews watching the surrounding water, lookouts tracking the Chinese ships through high-powered binoculars. The entire vessel feels locked into one controlled breath, ready for any development while maintaining the disciplined calm that separates professional naval forces from amateur operations. At 5:42 local time, the Chinese destroyer reaches the critical decision point where mathematics and tactics intersect with political calculation and national prestige. The vessel's projected track shows a closest point of approach inside 3 nautical miles of the American destroyer, now positioned between the Chinese ship and the aircraft carrier. In open ocean conditions with unlimited maneuvering room, such distances could be managed safely through coordinated navigation and professional seamanship. But in the Strait of Hormuz, with constrained waters, heavy commercial traffic, multiple escort vessels, and a massive aircraft carrier formation, that distance represents genuine danger for everyone involved. The American destroyer sounds one long blast from its horn, the deep metallic note rolling across the water with unmistakable authority, a collision warning signal that is legally required, professionally appropriate, and impossible to ignore or misyell.